In the heart of the Appalachian sanctuary, everyone gathered around a monitor. Seasoned wildlife keepers, anxious vets, and bleary-eyed interns stood vigil, their eyes locked on the monitor. Their breath held as a bobcat named Luna prepared to give birth for the first time. Luna, an imprinted bobcat who survived a roadside tragedy, has carried a fragile hope after a painstaking conservation effort. This wasn't just any birth. It was the culmination of years of healing and a last hope conservation effort. But the moment of hope soon turned to horror. Someone whispers, "No." The room erupted in helpless stillness as the keepers cried out, believing they had just lost everything. Until something impossible happened that not even science could explain. Stay with us. This is the kind of story that rewrites the rules of nature and proves that sometimes life refuses to give up. Before we start, hit the like button and make sure to subscribe if you haven't, and hit that notification bell so that you won't miss any new stories. Hank Aris Watch, 68 years old and weathered by as many Appalachian winters, believed he had seen every shade of life and death the Blue Ridge Mountains had to offer. He'd spent 40 of those years as the senior keeper at the Appalachian Wildlife Sanctuary, a place that was less a job and more a penance, a promise, and a purpose, all rolled into one. His hands, scarred and calloused, had set the bones of bald eagles and sutured the hides of black bears. But nothing, in all his 4 decades, had ever seized his heart quite like Luna. Luna was a bobcat, but she wasn't just a bobcat. To Hank, she was the living, breathing ghost of a roadside tragedy. He remembered the call clear as day, 3 years prior. A damp, frigid evening in late March, the kind that promised spring but still held winter's bite. A motorist, sounding shaken, reported hitting a bobcat on Route 219 just past the switchbacks. "It was awful, sir," the woman's voice cracked over the phone. She ran right out. I couldn't stop." Hank and the center's veterinarian, a young, brilliant firecracker named Dr. Sarah Chen, had driven out, their headlights cutting through the fog. They found the female, her beautiful, spotted body already growing cold. It was a terrible, senseless loss. Hank was logging the location for their records, his heart a dull ache, when he heard it. A sound. Less than a sound, really. A feeling. A tiny vibration in the air. "Sarah, cut the engine," he'd commanded, his voice a low growl. He knelt in the damp leaves by the roadside, his flashlight beam dancing over the underbrush. There, tucked into a hollow log not 10 feet from where her mother fell, was a single shivering kitten. Her eyes were still sealed, a tiny spotted scrap of fur no bigger than his glove. She was covered in frost, her mews so weak they were barely audible. "Oh, you poor, poor thing," he'd whispered, scooping her up and tucking her inside his heavy-duty Carhartt jacket, right against his chest. For the next 2 months, Luna was his life. Hank and Sarah took turns with the 2 a.m. feedings, a special milk replacer through a tiny bottle. But mostly, it was Hank. He'd sit in the dim light of the clinic, the tiny bobcat purring with a sound like a miniature motor as she kneaded his rough fingers. He'd named her Luna for the pale moonlight that had revealed her. But in saving her, Hank had doomed her to a life in captivity. She'd imprinted on him. She saw humans as a source of food, not a threat. She could never be released. This was Hank's private sorrow. He had given her life, but he couldn't give her freedom. She grew into a magnificent animal, sleek and powerful, with the characteristic tufted ears and the pensive, golden-eyed stare of her kind. She lived in a large, wooded enclosure, and Hank would often just sit with her, separated by the chain link, talking to her in a low, rumbling voice. Then, the problem. Dr. Sarah Chen, who monitored the wild populations, brought the data to Hank. "The numbers are bad, Hank," she said, her usual bright energy dimmed. "The new highway expansion, the habitat fragmentation. The bobcats in this region are becoming genetically isolated. We're seeing fewer and fewer viable litters. They're inbreeding. The population is declining, and fast." This hit Hank like a physical blow. The wild, free cousins of his own Luna were fading away. Sarah had a proposal, one that made Hank's stomach clench. "A conservation breeding effort," she said, her eyes intense. "We have the facility, we have the expertise, and we have Luna." "No," Hank said immediately, the word a steel trap. "She's not a science experiment, Sarah. She's been through enough." "Hank, listen," Sarah pleaded, following him as he stalked away to clean a feeding trough. "She's non-releasable, yes, but she is genetically perfect. She's a product of this very forest. Natural mating is too risky and unpredictable for injured or habituated animals. But if we assisted, her offspring could be wild. Her lineage could be the key to strengthening the entire population. This isn't about us, Hank. This is about them." She pointed to the mountains, purple and majestic in the setting sun. "This is how we give back what that highway took from her. We give her back her legacy." Hank stopped, the scrub brush in his hand. He looked at Luna, who was watching them from a high perch, her short tail twitching. Sarah was right. It was a bitter, difficult truth, but it was the truth. Saving Luna's life had been for him. Giving her a legacy, that would be for her. The process was long and fraught with anxiety. It was decided that artificial insemination was the only way, using genes carefully selected from a robust, healthy male bobcat captured and released in a different, thriving territory. It was clinical, sterile, and felt to Hank like a violation. But he held Luna's paw, or rather she held his finger through the fencing, as Sarah and the team did their work. Then came the waiting. Bobcat pregnancies are notoriously difficult to confirm. "Her hormone levels are up," Sarah would report, tapping her tablet. "But that could also be a stress response." "She's eating for two," Hank would grunt, pointing to the empty food bowl. "Or she's just bored," Sarah would counter, though her eyes twinkled. Hank knew. He didn't need the charts. He saw it in the way she moved, a new, subtle heaviness. He saw it in the way she started treating her bedding. For 3 years, her den box was just a place to sleep. Suddenly, she was arranging. She shredded the straw Hank provided, dragging in soft blankets he'd accidentally left near the fence, pushing it all into a corner, patting it down, then ripping it up and starting again. "She's nesting," Hank said, his voice thick. "The ultrasound is inconclusive," Sarah said, frustrated, peering at the grainy black and white image. "Their small litter size, the way they carry, I think I see a flicker, just one. But it's there, I'm almost positive." "She knows," Hank said, nodding toward Luna. "And she's ready." The sanctuary was put on high alert. A low-light, non-intrusive camera was fixed on the den box, streaming a silent, grainy feed to the observation room in the main clinic. Hank, Sarah, and 2 bleary-eyed interns, a young man named Ben and a young woman named Chloe, effectively moved in. They subsisted on stale coffee and pure, unadulterated adrenaline. For 2 days, Luna paced. She panted. She rearranged her nest again. Hank's own stomach was in knots. He was going to be a grandkeeper. The thought was both absurd and terrifying. On the 3rd night, it happened. It was 3:17 a.m. Chloe was asleep, her head on a textbook. Ben was scrolling through his phone. Sarah was staring at the monitor, her chin propped in her hand. Hank was standing, as he had been for hours, a statue of vigil. "Here we go," Sarah whispered, suddenly alert. Luna had laid down, her body taut. She let out a low, guttural sound that vibrated through the tiny speaker. She strained. The team watched, breathless. A few agonizing minutes later, a small, dark, slick form slipped out onto the straw. "She did it," Ben whispered, awestruck. Luna, panting, turned immediately. She began to lick the kitten, frantically. The observation room was silent. They all leaned in. The kitten, blind and drenched, was still. It was horrifyingly, terribly still. Luna licked it, pushing it with her nose, a confused chuffing sound coming from her throat. She licked it again, rougher this time. Nothing. No squirm, no mew. "Is it?" Chloe asked, her voice cracking as she woke up. "It's just... give it a second," Sarah said, but her own voice was tight with dread. "She needs to clear the sac. Come on, Luna." Luna nudged the tiny, limp body one more time. It rolled slightly, a perfect, spotted, lifeless doll. Then, Luna did the one thing that shattered Hank's heart. She stood up. She stepped away from the kitten. She looked at it, let out a distressed, almost angry sound, and turned her back, pacing to the other side of the small den. That was when the keepers cried out. "Oh my God," Chloe whispered, her hands flying to her mouth, tears instantly welling. "No," Ben said, shaking his head. "No, come on. She's rejecting it." Sarah's voice broke. She looked at Hank, her scientific composure completely gone, her face a mask of tragedy. "Hank, it's stillborn. We lost it." Hank gripped the back of a chair, his knuckles white. His throat felt like it was full of concrete. He had watched life come and go his entire life, but this felt like a personal theft. All that hope, all that science and prayer, all of it turned to ash. He saw Luna, his girl, who had lost her own mother, now lose her first child. The cruelty of it was a physical weight. The room swam. "Oh, Luna," he whispered to the screen, his own eyes burning. Luna was panting heavily, her sides heaving. She was clearly in distress, pacing, turning in circles. "Wait," Hank said, his voice a hoarse rasp. He squinted at the screen. "Sarah, she's not done." "What?" Sarah wiped her eyes, refocusing on the monitor. Luna wasn't just pacing in grief. She was straining again. "No," Sarah breathed, her eyes wide. "It can't be. The ultrasound. We only saw one. There was only one." "Ultrasound's wrong," Hank said, his heart suddenly hammering a new, frantic rhythm against his ribs. Even as he said it, Luna collapsed back into her nest. With one more powerful push, a second kitten was born. This one was different. This one was furious. It was tiny, it was wet, but it was wiggling. And before Luna could even turn, It let out a tiny, piercing, indignant mew that cut through the silence of the observation room. "I don't believe it," Ben whispered. The sound galvanized Luna. Her head snapped around, her instincts momentarily confused by grief, now roaring back to life. She forgot her distress. She forgot the first still kitten. She turned and began to lick the new squirming baby. She licked it, she chuffed at it, and she pulled it toward her belly. And in her haste to gather her new noisy baby, her paw hooked the first one. She pulled them both in. The new healthy kitten, blind and searching for warmth and food, squirmed and kicked, bumping right up against its still cold sibling. It kicked again, a tiny, blind, accidental act of life. And the first kitten, the stillborn, the tragedy, coughed. It was a tiny, wet, sputtering sound. "Did you see that?" Chloe screamed, pointing. "It's alive!" Sarah yelled, grabbing Hank's arm. "It's alive!" On the screen, the first kitten, jostled and stimulated by its sibling, gave another weak cough. Its tiny, reed-thin limbs began to twitch. Luna, as if sensing the change, turned her attention. She began licking the first kitten again, but this time with purpose, the rough tongue ace-drop, stimulating its breathing. The kitten, which they had all given up for dead, which its mother had given up for dead, began to mew. A weak, reedy sound, but it was sound. Hank didn't realize he was crying until he felt the wet track on his leathery cheek. He sank into the chair, the strength gone from his legs. He watched as Luna, a perfect picture of motherhood, finally settled. She curled her body around both of them, the vigorous one and the miracle one, and the two tiny scraps, indistinguishable now in their shared life, burrowed in and began to nurse. "The second one," Sarah said, her voice shaking with awe. "It must have been tucked right behind the first one on the ultrasound, blocking the view. We never saw it. We never even looked for it." "Two," Hank said, a slow, wide grin splitting his face. He felt 100 years old and brand new, all at once. "Well, I'll be..." The days that followed were a blur of hushed joy. The team, protective and proud, kept the world at bay. The first few days were critical, especially for the smaller kitten, the one they'd almost lost. They'd informally named them Surprise for the boisterous second-born and Hope for the first. When they were a week old, Sarah and Hank performed the first health check, a quick, efficient in-and-out mission while Luna was distracted. Hank was the one to lift them from the nest. His hands, which had held that dying kitten in his jacket, now held these two, warm, purring, and very much alive. "They're strong," he'd grunted to Sarah, his voice thick. "Good-looking boys." "Let's not get ahead of ourselves, Grandpa," Sarah had teased, taking swabs for DNA testing. "We need to know what we're working with." 3 weeks later, Sarah came bounding into the keeper's lodge, waving a printout. Hank was just finishing his morning coffee. "You're not going to believe this," she said, her smile so wide it looked like it hurt. "They're healthy?" Hank asked, his heart doing its familiar little jump. "More than healthy. They're perfect." She paused, vibrating with excitement. "And Hank?" "They're not boys." Hank lowered his mug. "What's that?" "They're female. Both of them." Hank stared. In the world of conservation, especially for a declining population, this was the jackpot. This was the equivalent of striking gold. Males were valuable, females were foundational. A single female could, over her lifetime, add dozens of new, genetically diverse bobcats to the wild. And they had two. Two, Hank repeated, the word tasting of wonder, hope, and surprise. The story of Luna's miracle birth became a quiet legend at the sanctuary. The heart-wrenching had become the heart-warming. The moment Luna had stood up, the moment the keepers had cried out in despair, was not an ending. It was, they now knew, the pause before the miracle. As the months passed, the kittens grew. They were not their mother. Where Luna was calm and accustomed to Hank's presence, these two were forces of nature. They were wild, hissing and spitting and pouncing on each other's tails. They were clumsy, all paws and ears, but their instincts were razor sharp. Hank would sit outside the enclosure, just as he had with Luna, but he wasn't sitting with them. He was just a spectator, and that was the way it should be. Luna, for her part, was an incredible mother. She was patient, attentive, and strict, teaching them the silent, watchful ways of their kind. The goal, the one Hank now clung to, was release. They would stay with their mother for a year, perhaps more, learning everything she could teach them in the safety of the sanctuary. Then, they would be taken to a protected, remote section of the Blue Ridge, far from highways and danger. They would be given the one thing their mother never had: a chance. One crisp autumn evening, Hank sat in his usual spot. The sun was setting, painting the mountains in hues of orange and deep purple. Inside the enclosure, Luna was on her high perch. Below, two adolescent spotted blurs tumbled in the leaves, stalking a beetle. Hank thought about the roadside, the cold, the tiny fading mew. He thought about the grainy monitor, the stillborn kitten, the black pit of despair in his stomach. And he looked at the two young bobcats, now sleek and strong, who carried their mother's legacy and their father's wild genes. The cycle, so brutally broken by man, had been mended by patience, by science, and by the stubborn, beautiful, surprising resilience of life itself. Hank, the old man of the mountains, had saved one, and in return, she had given him two. She had given him hope, and she had given him surprise. And that, he figured, was a pretty good trade.